Being 6 o'clock, we'll call a special meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mayor Bosmus.
Here.
Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Commissioner Collins.
Here.
Commissioner Gary.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Talentino.
Here.
Commissioner Torty.
Here. I was going to
Okay, we're
announce
all here.
myself.
Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Well, I had a little bit of time. Okay, I'd ask those with cell phones if they would please put them on vibrate. We would appreciate it, or turn them off. Okay, we're here. City Manager, the special law order.
Thank you, Mayor. If it pleases the commission at this time, I'll yield the floor to Community Development Director Freeman.
Okay. Evening, Kelly.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for coming an hour early today to attend this. I'd like to introduce Paul Lippens with McKenna Associates, Mike Campbell, Architect, and Adam Cook with Seamless Collaborative, who have helped us thus far through this project. And I understand that Paul will be speaking first, so I'll be brief and turn the floor over to Paul.
Thanks, Kelly. Okay, so we have a PowerPoint presentation here, all right, and it's up. Good evening, Commission. It's our pleasure to be here this evening to present to you the first draft of the Downtown Form-Based Code. Kelly was nice enough to introduce us, so you've heard this, but I know the three firms have been very excited to collaborate with Sault Ste. Marie on this project. It's been a real fun time analyzing the form of downtown and coming up with regulations that will ensure any future development matches and complements the character of this city. And that's what you're going to be hearing about this evening, is what we've worked up for you. So I'm going to start with a little background about the difference between zoning and a master plan. So you've also recently completed your master plan process, and the master plan is a guide for future growth. In your master plan, supported the idea of doing a form-based code and doing special planning for the downtown, but essentially just created one district for your downtown. And what we've done through the process of creating the form-based code is further look into the character areas of downtown so that we can provide a little bit more guidance on what types of buildings should go where. So yeah, master plans are the basis for zoning. The fact that you've updated your master plan really set the ground for doing this project. And the master plans are used by people to imagine the future and guide decision-making processes. The zoning code, however, is actually the law. It's when you adopt a new zoning code, you're adopting new regulations that will be today what requirements apply to land. So as the master plan is a policy document, it informs your zoning. The zoning code is your local regulation. Master plans are adopted by planning commissions. Zoning codes are adopted by city councils or city commissions. The master plan shows how land should be used in the future and shows a vision for that. The zoning code actually applies to what is required today. So while there is often a correlation, and there should be a correlation between the districts in your master plan and how they define the future land use, they're not always the same as the district as they're defined in your zoning ordinance. So if you change the districts in your zoning ordinance, it should align with the districts in your master plan and the policy established in your master plan. For the downtown form-based code, really what you have in your master plan is one district for all of downtown. And what we're proposing, and we're going over a little bit tonight, is how to change those character districts within an overall downtown, the overall downtown area. So the benefits of having a master plan are, and having your zoning ordinance come from your master plan, is that it will help you, if challenged in court, defend how you're doing your land use planning, and make sure that future development is harmonious with the vision of residents. once you have that master plan in place and you start to work on your zoning codes updates, now you're implementing your master plan. And that's what we're doing with the form-based code. So this is so far the process that we've gone through in the downtown form-based code process. First, we started with analysis. So we looked at the current zoning code, looked at your master plan, and also the development trends in the city to understand what the precedents were and create essentially a pre-charrette package that helped us work with residents and explore what was desired for form-based code for downtown. The highlight really of this process was the 4-day charrette that we did. And the charrette was really a series of workshops. I mean, it's kind of a fancy term, but what it means is that you're in the community, working with community stakeholders, and doing a series of workshops to work through the policy and regulatory issues that are desirable to be implemented. Since then, we've been taking all that information and formulating it into a draft code, and really that's where we are tonight. We have a draft code. We're going to cover with the commission tonight some of what's in that code. But again, this is really still just fairly early in the process, but what we're doing is we're starting the official review process. So we hope to take this draft code that city stakeholders will work with Kelly to provide him with feedback, and he'll share that feedback with us. And what we'll do is work to incorporate the feedback we get into a final draft. And once we have a final draft that the city is happy with, we start the formal adoption process for zoning codes, which is outlined in the state's Zoning Enabling Act. There is a public hearing required at Planning Commission. Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Commission, and then ultimately the City Commission is charged with adopting the zoning code. So that's where we're going. That's where we've been. A little background on form-based codes. Really, what you have now is a conventional zoning code, and a form-based code is one that's intended to foster predictable results, but do so by focusing on the built environment and what types of regulations will yield the type of built environment that you want. So they're really good in downtown areas where you're primarily concerned with what the buildings look like and do they match the context of the surrounding areas than the specific uses that are building in them. And what you'll find as my colleagues here present as well is that the uses are regulated by the type of building in a sense. So form-based codes will reverse trends that have been resulted in kind of tearing down or creating gaps in the built environment, and encourage people to live near where they shop and work. So here's an example of kind of the conventional zoning map, which uses shades of yellow and red, yellow indicating residential uses, red indicating commercial uses, and is kind of designed to separate and buffer impacts between uses, particularly like the impacts of industrial zones on residential zones. And it's a practical way of doing codes, and it works in a lot of situations. But in some situations, like downtown, it actually, what makes downtowns great is that you have a lot of different uses in the same area. Things are walkable. There's, a healthy chaos in a downtown where, that's what makes it interesting to be there. And typically the color codes you see in a form-based code are actually kind of shades of purple. So where the most dense heart of downtown is the darkest purple, and then towards the edges of downtown you use light purples. And this convention makes it so that you can actually overlay a form-based district or form-based area onto a conventional zoning map and still kind of see where your form-based codes will apply. So what we've led to here is a building type code, and the building type codes are based on the master plan that was put together And specifically, there was a design preference survey in that master plan, so we used that as a basis to start defining the context and taking precedence for how to code the area. And this is showing the images that were preferred in that design preference survey that was conducted in your master plan. And the preference is to make sure that downtown buildings are mixed-use, multi-story buildings and constructed near the sidewalk. We did find in the charrette process that there was a little bit of variation in the types of buildings that should be permitted downtown and in the districts in downtown. So I'm going to go a little bit faster through some of this stuff. We looked at different types of buildings, different things that we learned about the medical campus and what you want out of medical buildings. These are things that we covered in the charrette process to develop the code. We looked at different types of hotels and what the characteristics of hotels that wouldn't contribute to downtown Sault Ste. Marie are, and then what types of things would contribute. And the Ojibwe hotel was, I think, a really good precedent of the type of design and character that you might want to see in a new hotel as well. We looked at single-use or dedicated storefronts, characteristics of buildings that we learned you wouldn't want, and then some ideas for how a single-story storefront could actually be done in a way that would be unique and match the character of town, and similarly what light industrial buildings might look like. We spent a lot of time on housing, understanding what the housing precedents were like in Sault Ste. Marie, and if we were to create new housing types, which we call the missing middle housing type, somewhere between single family and large mid-rise apartments, there's a whole opportunity of different, typically underserved housing types. So we looked at the housing in Sault Ste. Marie to see what the housing looked like, and if we wanted new, how we could code that. And here's an example of a small apartment building in Sault Ste. Marie that we used as a precedent to say we would like to permit new housing of this type to be built in the area. Here's another example of a unit like that. We looked at row housings, which is another type of missing middle housing, row housing or townhomes. And we looked at examples around the Midwest of row houses that really match the Midwestern vernacular architecture. So a little bit more on the charrette before I hand it off to Mike Campbell, who's going to talk a little bit more about what a building type code is. We were here for 4 days in May. We met with a lot of residents. Many of you participated, and thank you. And we did we did an exercise that we call a mental map, which is asking people to think about how do they visualize the city, and what did they learn, what do they know about the city that they wanted to be captured in this process, by telling us about their favorite places to shop, favorite places to walk, what places maybe could be improved, and favorite public spaces. And we got this series of really great maps that everybody made their own map and kind of walked us through their high points on these maps. And it helped us to understand the character of Sault Ste. Marie and how there are actually different places that people think of that can be defined differently and can be encouraged to develop by different, encouraging different types of building types in those areas. So the results of that was to kind of create a character plan, and these are examples of the character plans that actually were drawn by residents during that charrette process, which defined, very clearly, an entertainment area, arts and culture area, tourist area, the core downtown, medical campus. These themes came up in each group, and what we found is by kind of working in separate groups to develop these separate character plans, that then we could develop a consensus plan for how we might propose regulating the character within the downtown area. And we also asked about desirable uses. So I mentioned that the form-based code is not regulating uses in the same way as a conventional code. What we're actually doing is regulating buildings and then saying which uses are permitted in which buildings and which buildings are permitted in which district. So we did brainstorm, though, what types of uses we wanted to encourage in each of these districts to make sure that we were also creating building types that could be built in those districts. And here's an example of what we, the uses that we heard needed to be encouraged. And then finally, that in that charrette process, we really ended by creating that regulating plan. So the regulating plan will be the zoning districts. It will be a new zoning map for your downtown. And we, with residents, kind of created two alternate versions of that, and they were, again, very similar. And then what we did was work on combining those into a final regulating plan. And this is what we're proposing as the regulating plan for downtown as part of your form-based code. And there's the districts, I kind of mentioned them. We came up with an arts and culture district, downtown core, downtown riverfront district, entertainment district, district which we're in now, which we call the government service district, the medical center, neighborhood services, and the tourism district. So all of these are located within the boundaries of your DDA and what you would call downtown. And the buildings within those districts we're proposing to be regulated separately. So here's an example. On the top, you see that there are A through T. Those are each individual building types. And we're going to be presenting those building types to you tonight. And we did, as part of your packet, we included just that chapter because we think that's kind of the bulk of the regulations. But you'll see there are certain building types which are permitted only in certain districts. And whereas in your conventional code, you also have special land uses or conditional uses. In this code, we would be saying that there are certain buildings that are conditionally be approved within different districts. And those are in yellow on this table as well. So that's my kind of overview on the process and the charrette. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Mike is going to go through a little bit on what the value of doing building type code is and describe it. Mike's an architect, and your code, obviously, if you go in the direction we're recommending, will code architecture for downtown. So, Mike?
Greetings, Commissioners.
Evening, Mike.
Okay, I wanted to spend some time talking about what, a building types form-based code or building types based form-based code means to the user. What it means is the user of the code will select from
Hey,
an array.
Mike, excuse me. Could you pull that microphone near you?
Yes.
There you go.
Thanks. What a building types based form-based code will mean is to the user is that the user will select from an array of allowable building types within their district. And with that selection will come regulations regarding the building setback, the building height, the frontage types, such as a front porch or a storefront or a stoop or whatever the case may be, and also certain specific architectural regulations. This differs from a conventional form-based code. The conventional code being based on the SMART code, and the SMART code, you're asked to assemble your own building type from building disposition, which is the general placement of the building on the site, the building configuration, which regulates the building height, and then the frontage. And once you have these three selections made and you've assembled your unique building type, you go to a form-based code graphics table that tells you in your particular zone what your setbacks are going to be, okay, among other things. I've got it. One slide is out of order here. In a building types-based code, we're going to base the setbacks on the building type. Okay, so I don't have that slide for you. I apologize. Since the forms in a building type code are usually familiar, and since the selection process is just one step, a building types code is generally intended to be more intuitive and easier to use than any other form-based codes or a conventional zoning ordinance. It's also lends itself to architectural regulations, because in addition to having general architectural regulations, which we will have, we can also point to specific features on each building type, because we have the images developed of those types, okay? It's well suited to the Midwestern applications, because unlike Europe and New England, traditional Midwestern towns don't necessarily have a strictly aligned setback or frontages. They don't create a continuous street wall on every street. They do on the downtown, which we will, or in downtown areas, where you have mixed-use buildings set with all the same setback at 0 feet, and storefronts creating a continuous wall for shopping. But in other streets in the Midwest, you get a look more like this street in Ann Arbor, West Jefferson, where we have the Jefferson Street Market as a retail building type. It's built close to the sidewalk or up to the sidewalk, whereas the adjacent lots, you have different building type, in this case residential, single-family residential houses. They don't have the same setback. So in order to achieve a Midwestern character, we don't necessarily want on every street that strict alignment of frontages. Here's another example of a retail building in Royal Oak. It's up to the sidewalk, and then the residential buildings are set back. And another example in Hamtramck of a restaurant doing the same thing in a lodge in Hamtramck. Here's a shot of the Cass Corridor in Detroit. You have 3 building types here. On the right, you have an apartment building. In the center, a civic building. And on the left, an industrial building. And you can see the setbacks of those buildings conform to the building type. One exception to this is specifically the front setbacks on residential building types. It's not always the case, but as a rule, they seem to be, in the Midwest, they seem to be aligned with one another. You can see this is a pretty intensive development in Ferndale. It's an apartment building sitting within a single-family neighborhood. But the front setback, it helps to make that compatible, whereas the side setback and rear setbacks do not, okay? And that's true in these buildings that we're so fond of in Sault Ste. Marie. You have a 4-plex on the right, a duplex in the middle, and a single-family house on the right. You can see that, in this case, at least the front setbacks agree with one another. Okay, some of that, I thought I'd run through some of the buildings that we use to calibrate our code, or calibrate the individual building types in our code. We created a hotel building type based on the Ramada, looking at both the front and side setbacks. A motel building type based on the Lockview Motel, looking at the side and front setbacks as well. A mixed-use building based on this building at the corner of Portage and Ashman Street, using the right-hand side of the building to calibrate the mixed-use building, and the left-hand side of the building to calibrate a bank building type for your code, including for the retail buildings, retail and mixed-use buildings, recessed doorways at the front. This engineering building we used to calibrate an office building type and a live-work building type, because it has an elevated first floor. And this 4-plex we looked at to calibrate for a 4-plex building type. We looked at your medical research office buildings and the development of our medical research building type. Some of the smaller single-family homes for a single-family home building type, although we don't require that they be this small, but we focused on those, or put emphasis on the smaller ones. And then this particular adjacent duplex near downtown for the development of a building type called adjacent duplex. And this stacked duplex for another building type called a stacked duplex. Let's see. That's it. Okay.
You asked me to put the table at the end.
You put the table at the end, okay.
I thought you'd start with everything.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. As Paul mentioned, we've got our regulating plan, and the sub-districts, or what we've come to term as sort of the replacement for the individual zones downtown, are mapped here parcel by parcel on the regulating plan. And they hew really closely to the context zones that were that came out of our charrette exercise back in May. And so we can go a little bit into detail. If you can follow along on this plan, we've got the Arts and Culture District, which you can see there in the light pink color, which is sort of clustered there right around the Power Canal and Ashman Street. There's sort of a unique character in that district that was defined by stakeholders as really being generated by the presence of the theaters, the presence of the library in that district, and the presence of some museums and some of the other cultural centers along Ashman Street. If we go further north along Ashman, you'll see the darker purple there, and that's the downtown core. That sort of is centered there on Ashman Street, and it is the historic, dating back to about the 19-teens, 1920s, sort of the historic core of commerce and activity in the downtown area. And we tested that concept with residents and asked them, you know, is that what you still think of as, you know, thinking about 20 years into the future, 30 years into the future, where you would like to see the sort of nucleus of activity and life and vibrancy in downtown? And it was identified as still being on that central part of the Ashman corridor. If we go a little further west, you can see a slightly more purple area, which we have labeled downtown residential. And that was due to an identified need for some, you know, an area of, you know, more intense residential use, but maybe not so much commercial use. If there's going to be a growth in, you know, mid-sized multiplex buildings to large multiplex apartment buildings, you know, due to economic growth downtown, due to construction on the locks, where would that type of housing be most appropriate in the downtown area? And it was identified that certainly not closer to the riverfront, not closer to where the tourist district is. Those areas have their unique attributes and characteristics, but a slightly larger format apartment building might not be in concert with that. And then likewise to the east of downtown, maybe not so much appropriate there either, as that's where we transition into a more single-family, quiet residential neighborhood, which is where we're sitting now, which is the government service district. If you see the dark blue, which stretches along Portage Street, that's the entertainment district. That is principally the block along Portage that everyone is associated with nightlife, with entertainment. So, you know, Maloney's Alley, the Ojibwe Hotel, the tourist-based shops and restaurants. People see this as a lively area, and we want to ensure that the type of development is commensurate with not walling that off in the future, with not, you know, preventing that that type of activity from continuing to take place. Government Service District, that's the gray area flanking the east of downtown. Again, we've got the county courthouse. Obviously, we have City Hall building there, as well as a number of smaller office service type buildings that cluster around these government functions. We also have a number of single family homes and a few multiple family residential properties in that district as well. And again, it's designed to serve as a place for civic functions as well as associated business functions, and really make a nice smooth transition to that lower density, more single family environment that we have to the east once we get out of the downtown form-based district back into the existing zoning district. The pink that you'll see on the to the north side of the Power Canal there is the Medical Center District. That's another special district that had to take a little work to suss out just due to the technical nature of hospital buildings. You saw a few slides that Paul and Mike presented, which we kind of blew through but said what not to do. We talked about those, and we showed those slides a lot at the charrette. You know, we want to have our medical centers, in this case War Memorial, we want to have them able to develop new modern facilities as the community's needs dictate. At the same time, we want to be able to sort of strike a balance between that and allowing our street frontages to still stay walkable and comfortable places. And that's what the regulations for the medical center context zone try to do. When you get in the neighborhood service district, that's the very light gray, and that's on that little arm of the form-based code district that stretches along Ashman Street south of the Power Canal. That neighborhood service district is a good example of, and we used this back in the charrette, of why a form-based code is maybe appropriate for a downtown. This is where you have, going north along Ashman from Easterday, okay, up to the canal, you have a very nice one, maybe maximum two-story scale of commercial buildings. This is really sort of the repository for people's everyday needs when they're coming into the downtown district. You've got a grocery store there. You've got a number of other associated businesses like that that are very popular. The one thing that's on this stretch of road, which serves as a good example as to why we are interested in the form-based code, is the Burger King. And it's not that the Burger King is not a good business or not serving stakeholders well, but it's that it stands out very prominently as not being of the same type of character on that street. You've got, walking up the east side of Ashman Street toward the Power Canal Bridge, you know, a very nice, where there are buildings, consistent street wall. It's a very comfortable street to walk down, and it's very easy to sort of interface as a pedestrian with what's in the storefront windows of those buildings. Of course, you get to that Burger King lot, and you've got a drive-through lane in between the sidewalk and the building, and, you know, some other things there that maybe don't fit in quite as well. And last but not least, we'll talk about the tourist district. Tourist district extends westward along Portage Street there to the western edge of the district. That's where we have the Lock View. That's where we have a number of the smaller gift shops and tourist-associated activities. And it's a very unique district, not just in the city of Sault Ste. Marie, but I think really within the state of Michigan. My colleagues and I mean, that's kind of what we love to do, is to study Michigan downtowns and Midwestern downtowns. And we've used all of this in conjunction with our work here on site to synthesize this material into a code. But one of the things that we've really seen is that tourist district is an incredibly unique area. It really does look like a postcard sort of straight out of the 1950s or 1960s. And that's something that has been identified as being valued greatly by the community, something that needs to be preserved. And so we really took special attention to develop some building types that are unique to that area. And so any new development in that tourist district can be replicated, can be tasteful, and not detract from that existing charm that the tourist district has. So now we move into the building types table, which has been mentioned before. Again, you can see those context zones listed along the left-hand column of the table. And then you can see those building types listed along the top. And for brevity, we just have them labeled here as letters A through T. And that's just a device that we'll be using in the full code just to make it easier for users to associate a letter with a particular building type. And so for the purposes of this first draft, we've lettered our building types. We have 20 of them, A through T. And I'm just going to briefly walk you through each of those 20 building types. So we can see the single-family house. This is pretty much the standard residential product here in the Midwest. It's what many of us live in, and we want to ensure that future single-family homes within the confines of the form-based code district are built in a way that's commensurate with those that currently exist in and around downtown Sault Ste. Marie. One thing that I do want to stress is I'm going to go through these one by one, and you'll see these pictures. We have not developed a code that requires a builder to build this exact house or that exact house. But what we've done is we've parameterized, so standardized those elements that make the single-family houses of Sault Ste. Marie and the ones that the stakeholders find as compatible with the downtown character, and likewise with the duplexes, and likewise with the commercial buildings. We've parameterized those dimensions so that somebody that wishes to build one of them can follow the instructions, have actually a wide berth of creativity to build something unique and something enjoyable for both the user of the building as well as the entire community that's sharing neighborhood with it, but within certain strictures so that we maintain compatibility. So type A, single-family house. Type B is the adjacent duplex. This is a type that we see a lot. I'm from the Detroit area. These are, and specifically Dearborn. East Dearborn, Michigan has quite a few of these types of homes. You can see it defined as defined with a double porch in this case, 2 separate entrances, and that house is split into 2 separate units sharing one building. We have the stacked duplex. In this case, the 2 entrances share a porch. One unit is on the ground floor. A second unit is on the second floor. So the house is split vertically rather than horizontally. That's the difference between the adjacent and the stacked duplex. Now we get a little fancier. We get into the triplex. In this case, we've illustrated it as a Victorian-styled house. It does not have to be a Victorian-styled house per the requirements of the code. This is just one potential way that it can be done in a way that's commensurate with existing historic buildings in Sault Ste. Marie. And with the triplex, we have 3 units, as the name implies. We have 1 common entrance, and typically there are 3 separate entrances off of that common entrance inside of the building, and so they could be accessed maybe by an interior stairwell. Maybe we have 2 units accessed from the bottom and then a stairwell. There are a number of possible configurations if one is interested in building a triplex. The fourplex, we get into, again, a common courtyard entry. So you go in that ground floor door. Inside that entryway, there are perhaps mailboxes and entrances, again, to 4 separate units, typically 2 on the ground floor, 2 on the second floor. This is an interesting type called the bungalow court. Now, these are, believe it or not, a lot more common out in California. If anyone's visited the Los Angeles area, you'll see a bungalow court, especially in places like Pasadena. We're not trying to bring Southern California to Sault Ste. Marie. What we're trying to do is take that building type and make it accommodate the existing context of the Sioux. And what we're talking about is a sort of ring-shaped cluster of 7 small houses. So 1, 2, 3, 1 on the end, and then 1, 2, 3 surrounding a small court. These satisfy the demand for people that wish to live in, individual house-type units that are smaller in format, smaller in square footage, but at the same time, you have a little bit of common yard there. You have almost acts like a little bit of street out front. These are also good flex-type buildings. They can be used for, in some places, they've been used for artist cottages and things of that sort. Here, we're looking at them as a residential use. Going a little further up the scale of missing middle, as you can see, there's sort of a method to how we've organized and lettered these building types. We're going from A, the single-family house. Now we're going up to G, a row house. So now we're looking at potentially 6 units, 7 units, 8 units in a row. So we're doing this in order of number of units in the residential building type. Again, we showed you some photographs a couple of slides ago of maybe how the stakeholders in this community don't want to see row houses done, and how some precedent row houses in Michigan and in the upper Midwest are done in maybe a more tasteful manner. And this is one example of how that might be done, and we've parameterized that in your code. Going on to type H, the small apartment building. We've seen examples of this. There's quite a few examples of this throughout the Midwest. These would have potentially more than 10 units. They're oriented in such a way that they occupy maybe a corner lot or even a mid-block position. But what they do is they really allow for a little bit of visual articulation and maybe not so much the sort of glass and synthetic sheathed buildings that you're seeing go up to fill this purpose in communities such as Ann Arbor and East Lansing. Again, the small apartment building can be developed under this code. It'll serve the same purpose. It will serve that market niche that wants to live in a building that has maybe 10 to 15 units in it, but it'll also interface with your downtown and look a little bit more traditional under the parameters in the code. Large apartment building, roughly the same thing, only this could be a building with 15 or more units and go up a few more stories up to your existing height limits. We have provisions for an accessory dwelling unit / residential garage. So for the single-family homes, There could be provision for a separate garage, but there's also flexibility there. That outbuilding does not necessarily just have to serve as vehicular parking. That outbuilding could serve as an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, or if you're familiar with Happy Days, you know where Fonzie lived. It's a nice alternative for example, aging in place families that want to make maybe accommodations for an aging parent or for a younger but independent child, all sorts of different configurations. We want to allow that under the code, and we can do that in a way that's commensurate, again, with the existing sort of tradition of having detached garages here in the Sioux. We get a little bit more into the meat of the code when we're thinking of downtown when we get to building type K. We're at the live-work building. There are 3 variants of the live-work building, as you can see. The one in the middle, type A, looks a little bit like a townhouse, only we've got an entrance that's at the ground floor level. In one of these buildings, a proprietor could theoretically live in the upper story or the back of the building and have, so for example in type A, this might be an appropriate type for someone that is a lawyer or maybe has a doctor's office, some sort of professional office that they could use at street front level on that bottom floor. In the case that someone wants to be a proprietor of, you know, maybe a small bakery or a small retail outlet, type B allows that building to then get what we call a shop front frontage. And we all know what a shop front frontage is when we see one. It just means plate glass windows that go roughly from the sidewalk up to the top of the first story, a articulated entranceway, and provisions for some awnings and lighting, so you can advertise your business name. And finally, there is a type C as well, which just provides for a building that's a little bit more recessed from a 0 lot line frontage. Type L, this is our classic one-story retail building, which we see peppered throughout single-family home neighborhoods in the Midwest, but we also find completely appropriate for a downtown use. And it's pretty simple. Again, shop front frontage and room for, you know, one, or could even be divided into several different proprietors out of the same building. Type M, this is pretty much this is the classic type when we think of a downtown, and it's what made the bulk of those precedent photos that were used in the visual preference survey when you were developing your master plan. This is the classic Midwestern downtown mixed-use building, and you can see again some of the elements that define that building, make it unique, and we have many of these in the Sioux, and many of the sort of particularities, especially when it comes to materials, when it comes to that local stone, for example, as being one of the claddings on those buildings that's so unique to them here in the Sioux. But again, they all share relatively general characteristics, which we've parameterized. Again, you can see the way the facade is divided vertically into segments, sort of into columns, as you will, and then horizontally as well, where you've got a band of windows across the top, and you've got a almost like a sign band, and then your shop front on the bottom. Those types of features are what define, when we sort of really get down to the theoretical part of it, what defines a mixed-use building. Those types of things define that building. We want to ensure that more of those get built in the years to come downtown as demand dictates. This is actually one where we've pulled out the section from the building types article of the code just to show you as an example. You can see how, and one of these spreads is going to accompany all of these building types. And so for type M, the mixed-use building, you'll notice on the left-hand side we've got specific requirements, and in this case there are 20 of those. We've got a table on the right-hand side which has numerical parameters, another table of allowable materials, and another table of allowable uses. And it would take me too long to go through these one by one, but let me just pull out a couple examples for you. So if we look at, on that left-hand column, that specific requirements table, we look at number 1. It says traditional building facade treatments, including masonry reliefs and/or motifs, as well as main business entrances, to be located along streets of corresponding building addresses and at right-of-way lines. Side entrances subordinate and allowable at right-of-way lines along intersecting streets only. Side entrances along parking lots prohibited. Rear entrances also subordinate. Subordinate means usable, but not of principal importance. So, for example, if you think of a commercial building that might keep its doors locked, its front doors, street-facing doors locked during business hours, but keep its rear door, which might face a rear parking lot, unlocked. Okay, we're talking about flipping that in terms of making the rear entrance subordinate. Main entrance at corner may substitute for that listed above. Something that gets a little bit more into dimensionality and development. If we go all the way down to point number 10, we say phasing of site development is to be coordinated with structural bays. Any first bay developed front to back for a minimum distance of 20 feet before development of any adjacent bay is to begin. Adjacent and subsequent bays to be developed front to back in a similar manner. And that simply means that if I'm interested in building, say, a block frontage of these mixed-use buildings, it's got to be sort of in order. It's got to be from one side, front to back, front to back, front to back, front to back. Rather than, for example, I want to build out my corner sites first here, and then leave the interim of the block undeveloped for some unspecified period of time until I feel like I want to build the next unit. We're simply adding, in that particular requirement, a degree of linearity of development. So these are the types of things that are going into our thinking and are going into the requirements in this code. If we look over on the upper right-hand side here at the numerical parameters, we have a table that's very similar to this one for all of the different building types. And so you can see along our rows, we've got dimensions for building size. We've got dimensions for window units, rectangular windows, windows that are maybe other shapes, window sills, exterior doors, exterior doorways, things of that nature. All of the things that are really common, in fact, to all buildings, right? Windows, doors, dimensions like that. And again, we can read down those columns and see that, for example, with this mixed-use building, the width of that building could be 20 feet to 264 feet in width, which just simply says the narrowest such building should be 20 feet or shall be 20 feet wide. And at its widest, 264, that's the width of a standard block frontage. That's just one example. If we go down to windowsills, we say, and forgive me, I think that's a 1 on my sheet. I've done so many of these in the last couple of weeks, it might be a 2. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, it is a 1. 1 to 4 inches. So there we're talking about windowsill on that building should project 1 to 4 inches outward. Again, these things are pretty standard when we've gone and measured buildings, not just in your community, but when we do this all throughout the Midwest. Lest you think that we're nitpicking a little bit, these are actually pretty fundamental parameters that were common to these buildings that were built all the way from the turn of the last century all the way through about 1950 or 1960. And by having, some very easily readable parameters here, we can ensure that somebody that wants to build one can replicate that, but again, have enough flexibility to make something that's truly special and unique as well. We get into allowable materials. Again, we can see the building walls being brick or sandstone or Portland cement stucco. Can read down those rows. We have material standards for walls, for building accents, for window trim, door trim, windowsills, and columns. And you can see the variety of materials that are present, again, taken from our field work here in the Sioux. And then finally, we do get into uses. We get into the use table. What use, although, again, the building typically will dictate the type of building, its parameters, its dimensions, will typically dictate what types of uses take place. So for example, this type of building, the mixed-use building, we wouldn't allow a garage door on that, for example, for a shop frontage. So if I wanted to have a auto repair shop, well, good luck to me trying to get that in a type M mixed-use building. I can't have a garage door on it. I guess I could try my best, to have that type of business without a garage door, but the point that I'm trying to make is we don't necessarily have to then list every potential use as either allowable, conditional, or restricted because the form of this building type inherently dictates what it's likely to be used by. And so we can see in this case, retail and bank uses would be appropriate on the ground floor. We separate bank out into a separate category for a reason that you'll see in just a few slides. But second floor and higher floors, if these go beyond 2 floors, residential use, office, even light industrial, craft shops, educational, assembly, those latter uses would be allowed on the second floor as long as they were not, above a residential use, but residential could continue above that.
Just a point, Adam. We start a meeting at 7 o'clock, our regular commission meeting, and we want to have a few minutes before that. So if you want to have questions pretty soon, because I'm not sure how many questions there might be, but just so you want to wrap it up
I
fairly soon.
appreciate that. Thanks for letting me know. So we'll speed through the rest of these. Type in, again, bank building. This is why we separated the bank out as a separate use, simply because some bank corporations do not wish to have a building that's shared with any other use, in case somebody wants to try an Ocean's 11 and, live above there and, try and pull a fast one, or so they think. So we have a specialized building type designed for a bank that, again, is going to fit in a little bit better than some of the more modern bank buildings that have been built on Ashman Street in the last 40 years. The Medical Office Research Building. Highlight of this building is simply that the first floor offices are stepped up a half story. And so if you notice down there on the corner, there's a very small silhouette. You can see that the first story window starts right sort of at the top of their head. That allows for medical type uses to happen on that ground floor, but allow a sense of privacy without us having to say, make the windows tinted or untransparent, or just worse than that, maybe have a blank building wall there on the ground floor. Hospital, again, this is a hospital administration building. We don't want to ensure that any expansion to the existing hospital can't accommodate the latest design and technical requirements, but this is a concept and a parameter for an administration building for a hospital type. The motel, this is specific to the tourist district. Again, Mike did a great job studying the lock view and really parameterizing what a 1950s era motel looks like and how it interacts with both the parking lot alongside it and the street. This is probably something that has not been done, at least to our knowledge, in any other form-based code anywhere, as far as we know. The hotel, again, based on the Ojibwe, these are the parameters for more of a full-service, more grand in scale hotel, but it would also be appropriate if, for example, a modern chain like a Holiday Inn Express or Comfort Suites or something wanted to do a new build downtown, it would have to hew to just some more classic design parameters. Theater arena building type S. In this case, we're showing a theater, again, very similar to the Sioux Theater, very similar to the theater uses we've seen throughout the Midwest. And finally, the parking garage building type, only for sort of housekeeping purposes. We want to make sure that, we're not suggesting that Sioux is in need of any new large-scale parking structures. We do want to ensure that this code is able to grow with you in the decades to come, and that's simply why we included it here. So I'm going to hand this back to Paul for a brief recap of next steps, and thank you for your time.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay, thank you very much. I know you've got some more business to do tonight. Thank you for listening to the presentation. Our next step, really, we've got the draft code. In your packet, we included just the building types chapter for tonight, but you're going to want to look at the rest of it. And this, over October, we're hoping that Sioux stakeholders will review, provide comments. We'll work with Kelly to figure out the best way to do that. But then we will work on incorporating the comments we get and hope to, in November, issue a revised draft, hopefully a final draft, and then start the adoption process. So when you're ready, we'll be back to help you with public hearings. And in the meantime, we'll be working with city leadership to hear your comments and get them incorporated.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Anyone have anything else you'd like to add at this point? A motion to adjourn, Commissioner Gary?
I think we had a public comment and
Did we, on the
on this one.
public comment portion?
Yes.
Okay. Any public comments on the form-based code? Okay, hearing no public comments, thanks. Thanks, Paul. Commissioner Gary?
Commissioner comment.
Excuse me?
We had commissioner comment too.
Oh, commissioner comments?
Yeah.
Okay, commissioner comments. Any commissioner comments? Where did you find that? I couldn't find the agenda on that. Oh. Hey, you'd like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn this meeting.
Support.
Move supported. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion adjourned, meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.